what is my hair just... It's got the curls today, and therefore it does not know what it wants to do. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey, and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my auto-buy / auto-read authors. So kind of an auto-buy / auto-read, because to me they're the same thing. One requires money and one doesn't, but for like the purposes of like mine, they're the same. And that's just basically an author that you've read something by them, and so now you just want to read everything by that author. Doesn't matter what they come out with, you're gonna read it or buy it. And I have a lot on this list. Like, I have so many, I could not narrow it down. I wanted to do a top 10, and then I wanted to do a top 15, and we landed on 16 authors. So I'm going to try to go through this relatively quickly. I will leave a list of all the authors down below. I won't link every single one of the books, but I will link the first book that kind of started off my love for each one of these authors. So if you want to check those out, or you need spelling for the authors, or, you know, whatever, there'll be a list down below, don't worry. But kind of as like a blanket statement for all of these books, they're going to be pretty similar as to why I loved all of them. It's going to be, I read this specific book, loved it, and therefore now want all of their books. I don't own every single one of these authors' books, obviously, but I want to. Anything that their name is on, I'm going to want to read, whether that's an anthology or a new book or a book co-authored, like, it doesn't matter. I'm invested now. So, with that being said, let's get into my list, because there's a lot here. So starting off my author auto-buy, auto-read list is Zendaya Menon / Lily Menon. I think I have everything here, minus the, she does have a novella set in the Dimpleverse, which I have on my Kindle, but otherwise, these are all of her books that are currently out. I love her a lot. So, oh dear. Oh no. Oh, everything's falling now. So in all honesty, I've only read these 3 books by her, but I started out with When Dimple Met Rishi a couple of years ago, and I adored this book. I don't know if you can see the amount of tabs that I have in this book. This is when I discovered tabs, is with this book. But this one was just a fun romance, and it felt like all of those awesome rom-com movies that I've watched and loved. I got that feeling from this book, and therefore anything this author wrote I was there for. So I do own everything, like I said, minus the novella, physically on my shelf, but I've only read these 3. This is her newest one, Makeup Breakup, which is her first step into adult, which I read in February and loved. And then I also read Of Curses and Kisses last year, which is the first in a new trilogy. It's kind of based on Disney fairy tales. This one is Beauty and the Beast. But I love the way she writes. It's so great. Like, I get just sucked up in the world and the romances that she writes. So I will do anything for this author. So I have, oh, I can't even pick them up. I have all of her books. So this is my first auto buy, as you can tell. But I want to read everything this author has ever done. Speaking of romance authors that I love, the next one is actually an author duo, and that is Christina Lauren. I only have these 4 these 4 books by her, but I have read all of them, so that's good. But I got sucked up in the world. I started out with autobiography, actually, which is a YA, I guess you could say it is a YA romance, but it's more of like, I don't know, like it's much more hard-hitting than you would think. I just got swept up in this world. I thought their writing was really creative, and so I gave this one a shot and loved it. And then I got into their adult romance books, starting with The Unhoneymooners, Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating, and then I just finished my favorite Half Night Stand, and I've loved everything that they've written. I also have read the Christmas book that they just came out with, In a Hollandaise, but that's currently downstairs with all of our Christmas decorations. So I clearly don't have all of their books, but if their name is on it, I want it. One of these days, it's gonna happen. I'm gonna have an entire shelf dedicated to this author duo because their books are incredible. And if you love romance, you're missing out. And you should read their books because they're great. This next one is also an author duo, and that is The Lady Janies, which is Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. All of these authors have written things on their own, but I'm not as excited about them as I am when they write together. This is their Lady Janies series. I have read all three, and they're coming out with a Marie series starting in June, which I am ecstatic about. These are all kind of like humorous retellings of things that happen in history or literature. The Lady Jane follows Queen Jane Grey, who was Queen of England for 9 days. We've got My Plain Jane, which is kind of like a retelling of Jane Eyre, and then we've got My Calamity Jane, which is a western revolving around Calamity Jane. And I love their writing. I think they're so funny together. The point of these books for them was to write something humorous, and I think they did it. I started off my love with I picked up My Lady Jane because it sounded funny and it was in a time period that I enjoyed. And here we are. I love these books. They're incredible. As long as these three authors continue to write together, I will continue to read them. Can they continue doing series like this forever? Because I'm down for it. It's this book's fault, but I'm in love with this author. Trilogy? How do you call 3 authors? I don't know. These 3 authors who write together are great. The next author is actually a non-fiction author, and that is Nancy Goldstone. I've only read one book by her, which is The Rival Queens, which is about Catherine de Medici and her daughter. But I also have this one, which is Daughters of the Winter Queen, which follow the descendants of Mary Queen of Scots. This is kind of a weird one to put on this list because I've only ever read one thing by this author, but she's got a ton of books out there, and they're all very similar in I think her telling of them. They're just different stories, and I was in love with the way that she wrote The Rival Queens. I thought it was very digestible and very easy to understand, and she made the stories fascinating, so I want to read everything by this author when it pertains to like history, because I just think that she writes them in a way that as long as you are interested in learning about that specific thing, you're gonna love them. I've only read one book by this author, and I only own 2, but my goal is to own a lot of them, and I will continue to read her books because, I think she's great. The next author that I love is Meredith Russo. She has written these 2 books, but she also has a short story in this book called Meet Cute. I started off with If I Was Your Girl. I picked it up from the library randomly because I heard a lot about it, and I wanted to give it a shot, and I absolutely fell in love, and therefore now anything she writes, I am going to read it. So I've read everything I think that she has published, unless she's in another anthology that I don't know about. I never read anything where the main character was trans before I read her first book, If I Was Your Girl, and it just kind of like swept me up in this world. I read it within like 2 days. I didn't realize I was going to get that invested in the characters, but I did, and I love her telling of these books because each of her books has to deal with something very specific when it comes to trans lives, and it's never anything that I've ever thought about before reading her books. But I really like her writing. I think her books are incredible, and I will continue to read as long as she writes, which I hope is a very long time. Another author that I love is Elizabeth Acevedo. This is an author that I wanted to try for a very long time, and then when she wrote Clap When You Land, and it came out I believe last year, I read this first and absolutely fell in love with her writing style. She writes in this verse poetry, but she has very lyrical writing as well, and these are the 2 books that I currently own by her. I also have read The Poet X, and her third book, With a Fire on High, is not written in verse, and I have read it, but it's written in like just regular prose, but it's not my favorite of hers, so I'm okay with only having these 2 right now. But again, anything in the future that her name is on, I'm invested. I really like her writing style. It's very lyrical, it's very poetic. Even her prose sounded just like her verse writing. It's just this very interesting lyrical way of looking at the world where I've never thought of things a specific way, and then she writes them and you're like, that is exactly what that's like, but I would have never thought of that on my own. So I just like the way that she sees the world and then writes it down. It's great. I love her books. They're also stunning. I love her so much. This next author is also a weird one to put on this list because they have only ever written one book, which is this one. But I love this book so much that I will continue to read anything that they come out with, and that is Mason Deaver, who wrote I Wish You All the Best, which I did read in 2020 and just absolutely fell in love with. editing Kelsey here. There's actually a couple other books that this author has written. They have a companion novella short story to I Wish You All the Best that takes place at Christmas, so you know I will be reading that this upcoming December. And then they're also part of an essay collection. I don't really know anything about the essay collection, but there actually is a couple things that this author has written. Not full-length novels, but like essays and short stories. So, just wanted to clear that up. Haven't read either of those, but am now interested. I know Mason has a new book coming out this year. I cannot remember the name, so I'll plop a picture if I can remember on the screen. I don't remember exactly what it's about, but like, again, if they wrote it, I will read it, because I've loved this book so much. It's the first time I ever read a book where the main character was non-binary, and I got to just kind of see that world differently and see kind of just some of the things that this character goes through that I would have never have thought on my own. Very similar to how Meredith Russo wrote her books. And also they're an incredible writer, so like just plop that on top of this and it's just a beautiful package. So I loved this story. I loved the writing of this story. I will read anything by this author. The next author is another romance author, but this is a historical romance author, and that is Evie Dunmore. She only has these 2 books out currently, but there's 2 more in this series, and I'm not sure if she's written anything else, but as of right now, I do not believe that she has. This was her debut when it came out in 2019. This is just a historical romance companion series that revolves around these 4 friends who are part of the suffragette movement in England. And oh, I'm currently reading this one and I'm loving it, and I read this one last year and loved it. So I love this author. This was her debut, like I mentioned, and it does not feel like a debut. It feels like she's been writing forever. So I really like her writing. I like her storytelling. I will do anything for this author. So I didn't even know what this one was about before I bought it, let's be honest. And I will continue to do that for her because I love her. I love her stories. This next one is another author duo, and I'm pretty sure you can tell what it is by the giant gap in my bookshelves, but that is These Books by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. When these 2 authors write together, I'm down for it. They both write individually on their own as well, but none of their other books seem as interesting to me, and I love everything that they write. So I started out reading the first book, Illuminae, and the Illuminae Files series. I picked it up from the library on a whim and devoured this book. I was obsessed with this book, which made me love the rest in the series, Gemina and Obsidio, which are heavy, so I'm putting them down. So I've read those 3 and absolutely loved them, and then they've come out with this new series called Aurora Rising, or no, Aurora Cycle. The first one's called Aurora Rising. And I need to get my hands on the second one, which I believe is called Aurora Burning. Have I read this? No, I have not. But anything these 2 authors write together, I'm down for. I even have the short story Memento that's part of the Illuminae Files series on my Kindle, because anything they write together is sci-fi goodness, and I love them. So, yes. The next author is a middle grade author, and I feel like this should also not be a surprise, and that is Somin Chainani, who wrote the School for Good and Evil series that is falling on the floor. So currently he's only written this series. I believe he has another book co-authored that I think that's coming out this year. I don't think it's out yet. And then I know he's got a new one coming out soon, but I don't know if it's this year or next year. I'm really good with dates, you guys. But currently he's only come out with the School for Good and Evil series, which I own almost all of. I'm still waiting on the 6th one to come out in paperback. But I love this series. I love his writing of this kind of fantastical world, and I think his new book is somewhat fantastical as well. So if his name's on it, I will buy it, I will read it, I will love it. The next author is probably the first one that ever became an auto-read author for me, and that is Becky Albertalli. I read Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda my first year here on BookTube because my best friend loved it and thought I would love it, and I read this in an entire day, and therefore my love grew. Now she's let me down, obviously, with things like Leah on the Offbeat, but I'm willing to give her a shot, And then I've also got a couple things that she co-wrote with other people, like What If It's Us that she wrote with Adam Silvera, and Yes, No, Maybe So that she wrote with Aisha Saeed. Now this is the only book that I own that she's written or co-written that I haven't read yet. And I know that she's coming out with something new that's called like Kate is Waiting or something. I don't really remember. Do I know what it's about? Not even a little bit. Will I read it? Very much so. So, yes, this is an author that I've absolutely loved reading in the past. Her stuff is very easy to digest, and I have a special place in my heart for her because of my feelings towards the Simon verses. So, yes, an auto buy, obviously, but an auto read as well because I've read almost everything. The next one is another one of those weird ones because this author has only written one book and it came out last year, but I believe that she is working on other things, but again, if her name's on it, I will read it. And that is Anita Tyndale, who wrote Who I Was with Her, which was, I think, was this my favorite book of last year? Or was my second favorite book of last year? It was basically tied for first of my favorite reads of 2020. I received an ARC on NetGalley and absolutely fell in love with the way that she wrote this story, with the way that she crafted this story. It was phenomenal, and if you have not read this book, what are you doing with your life? Please pick this up. But it's all about grief and just like the different stages even one person can have through grief and where we can find comfort when you're grieving. And it was beautifully crafted, and I was completely enamored with the way that she wrote. It has the only way that I can think about it is it's very straightforward and lyrical at the same time. I don't know how that works, but it does. And although this author doesn't have anything else out at the moment beyond this book, I will continue to read anything that she comes up with because her writing is phenomenal and I loved this. The next author is one that I only own one book by her, but I've read it too and I want to read all of them. And that is Stephanie Hemphill. She writes in verse, but she writes very interesting things. Like this one, Wicked Girls, is about the Salem witch trials, and it's kind of a reimagining of the witch trials where she takes history and then just kind of like meshes it up and everything. And I've also read The Language of Fire, which is her reimagining of Joan of Arc. That's the book that got me into her writing. I absolutely loved it, and that book was really beautifully crafted because it's just kind of like this reimagining of what Joan would have been thinking throughout the entire time. And well, obviously we can't know what Joan was thinking. It was, I don't know, I just liked the way that she wrote that. And the same thing with Wicked Girls. It wasn't my favorite thing by her. I think Language of Fire was better, but I still really enjoyed this one. And she's got a ton of books out there that are all written in verse. There's one about Frankenstein's wife, Frankenstein's sister, someone related to Frankenstein. There's another one that I think is about two sisters that's not based on history. It's just like a story that's written in verse. But I just really like things written in verse, and I really like her reimagining of historical events. And she does her research because at the end of the book, she always goes into like grave detail about every single, like for example, this is all of the girls that were involved in the Salem witch trials, everybody that they convicted, the history behind all of them. She goes into detail and kind of explains what she had going in and like what is actually out there, and then what she embellished on, which I just really love. So I love this author and I want to read everything that she has written. The next one is actually a graphic novel artist slash author, and that is Katie O'Neill, who wrote the Tea Dragon Society series, the Tea Dragon Society, the Tea Dragon Tapestry, and the Tea Dragon Festival. I might have switched those last two up, but those are the three that are out in her Tea Dragon series. They're super cute. I love them. I love her crafting of these stories. I didn't love it when I first read this book because I didn't really know what I was getting into, but her artistry is just beautiful. She has incredible representation in all of her books, and then she's also got some other things out there. Like there's one about mermaids that I found on Hoopla, and oh my goodness, I want to read it. I love her. I didn't at first. She's one of those that like snuck up on me. My first thought was meh, and then it became great. And I got really close to the camera there. My next author is the one that was my favorite book of 2020, and that is Saree James. I read The Missing Manuscript of Jane Austen. She writes so similar to Jane Austen. She really understands Jane Austen that I just fell in love with this. And I also have a copy of The Lost Memoirs of Jane Austen by her that I want to read. But she's got other things out there. She's got Austen-inspired stuff. She's got Bronte-inspired stuff. I loved her story crafting when it came to The Missing Manuscript, and I think it's going to be very, very similar with the Lost Memoirs, and I just want to read a lot of stuff that she has written. I know that these are very historical fiction stuff. I know she's got some romance out there as well that does sound interesting. I love her writing. This book was amazing, and any Jane Austen fan needs to read this. Or if you just like historical fiction, you should read this as well. And the very last person I want to talk about is Madeleine Miller, who wrote Circe and The Song of Achilles. This was the first one that I ever read by her, Circe, but this is the first book I ever heard about by her. I had a couple of friends in college that, like me, were obsessed with Greek mythology and Greek history and just loved everything about that, and they both read The Song of Achilles, so I was listening to all of their thoughts while they were reading it and getting very excited about it, and then I realized that the author came out with something called Circe that is also revolving around Greek mythology. I love her stuff. I think her writing is incredibly beautiful. I loved her deep dive of Circe and just kind of like a reimagining of a goddess in a Greek mythology that gets barely a mention in the Odyssey, and just her history and everything, and then kind of a reimagining of what we all know as an actual relationship that would have happened in Greek mythology and did happen. Like, come on, let's be honest. So I just liked her reimagining of these Greek tales. I know she's got a short story out there on Scribd. I think that's a reimagining of something else Greek mythology related, which I have not read yet, but obviously if she's written it, I need to read it. I mean, I do love Greek mythology, so she's already gotten up there, but her writing is incredibly beautiful, and her books are very shiny. I apologize. But I'm sure this is one that many people have talked about, but I really like her lyrical writing. I really like how she can make you care about these characters so quickly, and I like her take on these stories, and I want to continue to read things that she has come up with, because I know it's going to be great. I don't know if she has anything in the works right now, but anything she writes in the future, I will get my hands on and read, because I loved these two. Alright, those are the books that I consider, or the authors that I consider auto-read/auto-buy. Let me know what some of your auto-buy authors are, or auto-read authors are. Do any of yours align with some of the ones that I mentioned on this list? I would love to know that. But if you did like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other bookish links, so don't forget to check all of those out, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!